There was a time when the word pride did not conjure to mind a parade of many people carrying a multitude of flags and each accepting each other's diversity, well, mostly all, as will be revealed later. Welcome to Transwise Transstrong. I am Caroline O'Reilly. Episode 25. Take pride in your parade. There are now pride events around the world and in every part of the UK, from the largest, the London and Brighton prides, to smaller and more local prides. But there was a time when June wasn't synonymous for Pride, nor was the whole of June Pride Month. It was in 1999 that President Bill Clinton declared June to be Gay and Lesbian Pride Month. Then, in 2011, President Barack Obama expanded the official recognition to include the entire LGBTQIA+ communities. The UK has so far not officially recognised June as Pride Month, although many shops, for example, will change their online logos to the colours of the Progress Pride flag in June. As for when the UK began to recognise Pride Month, as far as I could find out, it gradually began to be recognised. However, in February 2005, the charity Schools Out founded LGBT History Month to mark the abolition of Section 28, finally in England and Wales in 2003, having already been abolished in Scotland in 2000. And interestingly, this hateful legislation was never enacted in Northern Ireland. And if you are not familiar with what Section 28 was, it was a section of the Local Government Act 1988 that the Margaret Thatcher led Conservative government introduced, that, in summary, prohibited local authorities from promoting homosexuality by teaching or by publishing material. I mean, you couldn't make it up. And over time, this celebration has become more inclusive and now is often referred to as LGBTQIA+ History Month and is officially recognised. And although the UK was early to embrace Pride, for the first we need to look to the United States and 1970. However, before Pride, there was the annual Reminders organised by the East Coast Homophile Organisations, ECHO, which was established in Philadelphia in January 1963. The first annual Reminders took place on the 4th of July 1965 outside Philadelphia's Independence Hall and was to remind people of the lack of civil rights protection afforded to gay people. And until the preceding July, another minority group was also without civil rights protection, a minority that was 11% of the population, 21.3 million people. That was until President Lyndon B. Johnson on the 2nd of July 1964 signed into law the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Its origin was a nationally televised address by President John F. Kennedy on the 6th of June 1963, where he urged the nation to take action towards guaranteeing equal treatment of every American, regardless of race. And did it end racial prejudice and hatred? Of course not. Yes, it banned legislative discrimination. However, sections of US society then and now still harbours the cancer of racism that is possibly helped to metastasize through parts of American society by the current part-time incumbent of Pennsylvania Avenue. And in an interview with the New York Times published on the 11th of January 2026, they commented on the Civil Rights Act of 1964 by saying it accomplished some very wonderful things, but it also hurt a lot of people. So that would be white people? And of course, people of colour from the LGBTQIA plus communities experience the double whammy of racism and homophobia and or transphobia. And in fact, trans people, or more accurately, trans female people of colour experience a far greater level of danger compared to their white trans sisters. I wonder how Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. would have responded if asked, "What do you think of the concept of discrimination if white?" I believe he had a wonderful sense of humour, so perhaps a hearty, although ironic laugh? In the autumn of 1965, there was an ECHO meeting at which there was a proposal for a national planning conference. And in 1966, the National Planning Conference of Homophile Organizations, NPCHO, was founded to unite regional and local gay rights groups under one umbrella organization. The NPCHO would later change its name to the North American Conference of Homophile Organizations, NACHO, and also in 1966, ECHO became the Eastern Regional Conference of Homophile Organization, ERCHO, and was a subsidiary of NACHO. It was at the 1969 November meeting in Philadelphia of the ERCHO that Craig Rodwell, who had helped to organize the annual reminders, proposed that the Philadelphia demonstrations should become something greater and more relevant. And the ERCHO decided to commemorate the Christopher Street Stonewall Uprising that had begun on the 28th of June 1969 and lasted 6 days by holding a march in New York each year in June. And it is perhaps worth mentioning how the US government's National Park Services page about the Stonewall National Monument now describes that uprising. Under the heading Uprising, it starts Stonewall was a milestone for gay and lesbian civil rights that provided momentum for a movement, and the authors of the page were apparently comfortable with using the stigmatizing term homosexual 4 times in the opening paragraph. The thing is, the catalyst for the Stonewall Uprising is now considered to be the police's violent attempt at arresting Storm Delavera, and perhaps it was her cry of, "Why don't you guys do something?" Storm was gender non-conforming and of mixed heritage, and the police's attempt at arrest resulted in Storm bleeding from a head wound. And I said again, attempt, as Storm was able to break free from the police. Other key heroes of the uprising were Marsha P. Johnson, a black trans woman, and Sylvia Rivera, a Latino trans woman. They would together co found the Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, STAR, to support homeless queer youth. Tragically, on the 6th of July 1992, Marsha's body was found floating in the Hudson River in New York City. She was just 46 years old, and a mystery remains about the circumstance that led to her death. However, you wouldn't know about the trans and queer people's involvement if you relied on the National Park Service web page about the uprising, although previously they were included. Any guesses as to who decided on their exclusion? And one last thought. In 1984, George Orwell coined the terms newspeak and doublethink, and one of the party's slogans in the book was War is Peace. Now, why do these phrases seem to echo the thinking of someone with a Truth Social account? But back to the planning meeting, L. Craig Schoonmaker argued for pride to describe the event, and this would indeed be the event's core slogan and guiding concept. Another proposed name for the event was Gay Power, but Schoonmaker argued that gay people did not currently have political or institutional power, but taking pride in what one stood for was universal. And so, on Sunday, the 28th of June 1970, was New York's first Pride event, the Christopher Street Liberation Day. The name was chosen to pay tribute to the Stonewall Uprising. And in the weeks leading up to the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall Uprising in 2019, the New York Police Commissioner James O'Neill gave this apology. The actions taken by the NYPD were wrong, plain and simple. The actions and the laws were discriminatory and oppressive, and for that I apologize. And the name of New York's first Pride event lives on in Switzerland and Germany, where their prides are called Christopher Street Day, which was first celebrated in Switzerland at the Platzspitz Park in Zurich on the 24th of June 1978, and in Germany the following year on the 30th of June 1979. Prides are a day of celebration, but Berlin's 2026 Christopher Street Day turned into tragedy when a van was driven into the crowd, killing a Polish woman and injuring at least 29 others, some very seriously. The man suspected of driving the van was 21-year-old Abdul Balut, who had an extensive criminal past, and when the police tried to arrest him, he rushed towards them with a knife and was shot dead by them. However, New York's Christopher Street Liberation Day was not the world's first pride, as it was pipped for the honor by Chicago, where the Chicago Gay Liberation organized the world's first pride, which was also to commemorate the Stonewall Uprising, and it was on the day before New York's, on Saturday, the 27th of June, 1970. The starting point for Chicago's first Pride, according to the Chicago Pride Parade website, was Washington Square, and the march culminated in a rally at the Picasso statue in what is now Richard J. Daley Plaza, across from City Hall, and had an estimated attendance of between 150 and 200. Curiously, The National Geographic website that mentions this event states that it actually ended at Washington Square. And in 2026, the Chicago Pride Parade had nearly 1 million in attendance, a great figure, although New York trumped Chicago's attendance with 1.75 million. And whilst June is when Pride is celebrated in North America and parts of Europe, in Australia and New Zealand it is February, and Malta celebrates Pride in September. And the outright international website detailed that in 2025, 101 countries celebrated Pride, with 66 of those countries celebrating Pride in more than one city. However, 92 countries did not hold a Pride. And there are many countries where publicly expressing an LGBTQIA plus identity, such as a Pride March, are banned, including Russia and Turkey, and until recently, Hungary. However, following Hungary's recent general election, where Viktor Orban was defeated by Peter Magyar on the 27th of June this year, there was a Budapest Pride. And many countries where pride is banned have legislation that would have earned the admiration of the ancient Athenian Draco. And inspired by Stonewall and other events across the USA and internationally, Britain saw branches of the Gay Liberation Front GLF form in the 70s, and the meeting of the first Gay Liberation Front was in London and was held on the 14th of October 1970 in a classroom of the London School of Economics, the LSE. The room was booked by Bob Mellors, a second year sociology student who had been inspired to form a UK branch of the GLF after spending the summer in 1970 in the USA, where he became involved in the New York Gay Liberation Front. In September, he met a fellow Brit, Aubrey Walter, at the Revolutionary People's Constitutional Conference in Philadelphia, sponsored by the Black Panther movement, which invited delegations from the movements for women's and LGBTQIA plus rights for the first time. When the two arrived back in Britain, they spoke on the phone and decided to form the first UK GLF. And as Bob was a student at the LSE, he was able to book a room. As for the number who attended the first meeting, there is no precise figure. However, it's possible that it ranged from 9 to 19. I would like to end this discussion of the founding of London's GLF by saying that both men saw the lowering of the age of consent if gay that I discussed in the What Are Words Worth episode and the Same Sex Marriage Act that I mentioned in the Portrait of Caroline Cosey episode. However, whilst Aubrey went on to found in 1979 the Gay Men's Press with their romantic partner David Fernbach, Bob in 1991 moved to Warsaw, Poland, and on the 24th of March 1996 was murdered during a burglary of their flat at the same age that Marsha P. Johnson died, 46. In August 1971, the GLF youth group held a demonstration in Trafalgar Square protesting about the age of consent if gay, which then was 21 years or older, and in fact being gay had only been decriminalised 4 years earlier. The GLF group's demonstration is sometimes referred to as Pride Before Pride, And as for the first UK Pride, this took place on Saturday, the 1st of July 1972. This Saturday was chosen as it was closest to the Stonewall Uprising on the 28th of June 1969. The start was in Trafalgar Square and it ended in Hyde Park with a picnic. It was estimated that between 700 and 2,000 people attended, and in the following decades, prides would be held all across the UK. And this year's Pride in London, which was on Saturday, the 4th of July, had between 1.5 and 1.8 million in attendance. And as mentioned, in 1988 there was Section 28 of the Local Government Act, which resulted in some councils withdrawing support for Pride celebrations, whereas other better councils challenged the law by openly pledging funds and support for LGBTQIA events. And whilst London was the first UK city to hold a Pride, other cities followed, and the second city was Brighton. It was organised by the Sussex Gay Liberation Front and was held on Saturday, the 7th of July 1973. The starting point was Norfolk Square, and the finish was at the Old Ship Hotel. And in the evening there was a gay dance at the Royal Albion Hotel, and the number that it attracted was a tenth of the upper figure for London's first Pride of around 200 people, whereas this year's Brighton and Hove Pride had an estimated attendance of up to 450,000 people, and the other three nations of Britain would follow. Wales' first Pride was organised over a couple of pints of lager by a small group of students of the Cardiff University's Gay Society and was on the 20th of June 1985 and started at the Students' Union and ended at the King's Cross pub on the corner of Caroline Street. And his first Welsh Pride had about a couple of dozen in attendance, whereas 2026 Pride Cymru, which was a 3-day event, had an estimated attendance of 50,000. Northern Ireland's first Pride was in June 1991 and was suggested at a meeting of the Northern Ireland Gay Rights Association, NAGRA, on the 16th of May 1991 and was attended by approximately 100 people. A sharp contrast to Belfast's Pride in 2026 when 8,000 people attended. And Scotland's first Pride was in 1995 on Saturday, the 17th of June. It started at Barony Street, Edinburgh, and was organised by the Edinburgh University LGBT Society, and an estimated 3,000 people marched and protested, with the march ending at the Meadows. And the organisers of this year's Pride Edinburgh reported an overall turnout of over 44,500 people. And what about the rest of the world? The country with the largest population, India, first held a pride parade called a Friendship Walk in Kolkata in 1999 and is now held annually. And New Delhi and Mumbai also hold major pride parades. And the country that for many years had the largest population, China, well, there was the Shanghai Pride, but due to government restrictions and censorship, it was suspended in 2020. For the Pride with the largest attendance, we need to look to the Sao Paulo Parade in Brazil. that draws 3 to 5 million people, whilst for a million plus attendance there is the Toronto Pride, the Amsterdam Pride, and the Cologne Pride. And the Antipodes are represented by the Sydney Mardi Gras with up to 500,000 in attendance, and the Auckland Rainbow Parade with an estimated attendance of over 25,000 people. And closer to home, there was Paris Pride 2026. Or rather, there wasn't. It was scheduled for Saturday, the 27th of June. However, due to an extreme heat wave, it was cancelled at the last minute the day before. And in the UK, we have had multiple heat waves. I think the total so far is 5, and there have been numerous heat related records that have been smashed. Although what happened in 2018 at a Pride event was not heat related. Just because a person is part of the LGBTQIA plus community does not mean that they won't have prejudice towards other parts of the community, as illustrated by what occurred at London's 2018 Pride. At London's 2018 Pride, a small group of anti-trans protesters, who were mostly radical feminists, disrupted it, and this I find disgusting, were eventually allowed to lead the parade by officials all the way to Trafalgar Square, with a group of 10 called Get the L Out handing out hateful and extremely transphobic leaflets. There were many who quickly condemned both those hateful protesters and also that the London Pride organisers allowed them to spew their hatred whilst leading the parade. As a direct response to the hateful event that occurred at London's 2018 Pride, the following year, on Saturday the 14th of September 2019, London hosted its first Trans Plus Pride, inspired by Trans Pride Brighton, where transgender people and allies marched through the streets of that city. And with what feels like ironic cruelty, in the same year as the first Trans Plus Pride, Manchester's 2019 Pride was also hijacked by anti-trans protesters who were allowed to lead the parade whilst being escorted by the police and Pride security. This group of about 10 to 14 claim to be affiliated with Get the L Out, which was the group who were allowed to lead London's 2018 Pride, and like them, also handed out leaflets containing similarly hateful transphobic lies. The organisers of London's first Trans Plus Pride included Lucia Blake and Finn Love, and around 1,500 attended, marching from Hyde Park to Soho. And this year's route, which has been the same for a while, was from Langham Place near Broadcasting House to Parliament Square. And the attendance of London's Trans Plus Pride 2026 surpassed by 50,000 the previous years, with an estimated attendance of 150,000, and perhaps was a visible challenge to last year's transphobic Supreme Court ruling. But as mentioned, London was not the first to host a Trans Pride. That honour goes to Trans Pride Brighton and was first held on Saturday, the 27th of July 2013. The event's founders were Sarah Savage, Fox Fisher, Phoenix Thomas, Stephanie Scott, Saba Chowdhury, and was to provide a safe space away from the commercialism of the larger mainstream Pride event. And 2026 Trans Pride Brighton had a reported 40,000 plus people in attendance. However, for the first trans pride, we need to look back to the end of the last century and 1999 Los Angeles and the Trans Unity Pride, which was a single afternoon community event. As for how many attended, this was not recorded. And compared with UK Trans Pride, this year's Trans Pride Los Angeles 2026, that was hosted by the Los Angeles LGBT Center on Saturday, the 20th of June, had a relatively modest attendance of 1,200 people. The two largest US trans prides are Trans Pride Seattle and the San Francisco Trans March, both held on Friday, the 26th of June, and are comparable in size. Although, from what I have been able to find from research, Seattle had an estimated attendance of around 30,000 this year, whereas for San Francisco it was 20,000. But even 30,000, given that the US population is 5 times that of the UK, it does seem somewhat modest when compared to the 150,000 of London's Trans Plus Pride 2026. So, whatever the size of attendance, prides and trans prides are important as a visual reminder of our existence. Whether lesbian, gay, bi, trans, non binary, or intersex, we're here and we're staying. And hopefully, that hateful transphobic ruling of April 2025 by the Supreme Court will be consigned to history, although I hope much, much sooner than the 15 years it took before Section 28 was kicked into touch. And before you go, I thought I'd let you know that Transwise Transstrong has been downloaded in 73 countries. It would be wonderful if we could reach 100 by the end of the year. So, if you know anyone abroad who you think would be interested, perhaps you could let them know about this podcast. And also, I have really enjoyed writing the scripts for the episodes, so much so that I would like to branch out into writing fiction. And therefore, to accommodate this, I have decided to now publish the podcast on the first Saturday of the month. And so the next episode will be published on Saturday, the 5th of September at 2 p.m. UK time. This episode was written and presented by me, Caroline O'Reilly. Thank you for listening. Next time, pornography and the trans community.